It was a bright afternoon, sunlight streaming through the dusty windows of the Lucky Horseshoe Bar. The usual hum of conversation filled the room, laughter, clinking glasses, and the low murmur of a jukebox playing some old classic rock. Most patrons were nursing their drinks, chatting lazily, unaware that something unusual was about to unfold. Into this ordinary scene swaggered a man with too much confidence and not enough sense. Jeans ripped at the knees, leather jacket tight across broad shoulders, and a smirk plastered across his face. His sunglasses reflected the sunlight, adding a hint of arrogance to his already inflated ego. He scanned the room and finally landed on the man sitting quietly at a corner table, Steven Seagal. Steven wasn't making a scene. He wasn't flexing or calling attention to himself. He sat calmly, sipping a glass of water, his old jacket draped over the chair, eyes scanning the bar with a quiet awareness that seemed to unsettle the intruder. But the man didn't see caution or respect. He only saw a chance to impress the crowd. "Hey, old man," the intruder sneered, stepping closer. "Think you're tough enough to be in here?" His voice was loud, meant to draw attention, meant to intimidate. He laughed, a harsh, overconfident laugh, certain that fear would ripple through Steven. But Steven didn't move. He didn't react. He just looked up, calm, unbothered, as if the man wasn't even there. The bar's background chatter continued for a second, but some patrons had already started noticing the tension building in the corner. The intruder thought this silence was weakness. He leaned in, trying to get under Steven's skin, puffing out his chest and raising his voice. "Yeah, I said it. Maybe you should just leave before something happens." He laughed again, louder this time, pointing at Steven's chair as if he owned the place. What he didn't know, what no one in that bar knew, was that this was not just a quiet man enjoying an afternoon drink. This was Steven Seagal. And this man's arrogance had just sealed his fate. In the next few seconds, the smug confidence that filled the bar would be shattered, leaving everyone in stunned silence, their eyes glued to a scene that no one there would ever forget. He had come to intimidate. He had come to mock. But he had no idea. Steven Seagal doesn't just sit quietly. Steven Seagal breaks bones. Was a sunny afternoon at the Lucky Horseshoe Bar. The golden light of early afternoon streamed through the tall windows, hitting the worn wooden floorboards and making dust particles dance lazily in the sunbeams. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the faint aroma of fried snacks, and a soft hum of conversation filled the room. Patrons nursed drinks, flipped through newspapers, and chatted quietly, their faces relaxed in the calm rhythm of an ordinary day. At first glance, it was a typical afternoon, the kind where nothing exciting ever happened. But a single figure entering the bar would change that perception in an instant. He swaggered in, slow and deliberate, like a predator scanning his territory. Jeans worn at the knees, leather jacket clinging tightly to broad shoulders, and dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. His confident stride drew subtle glances from a few patrons, who assumed he was just another regular trying too hard to impress. But there was an edge to him, a sharp arrogance in the way he held himself, the kind that suggested he was looking for trouble rather than peace. Then his gaze fell on the corner table. There, sitting quietly with a glass of water in front of him, was Steven Seagal. Not a word had left his lips. He didn't have a bodyguard. He didn't need one. His calm presence alone seemed to fill the space, though few noticed it at first. Steven's eyes scanned the room occasionally, not out of suspicion, but out of awareness. He did not look up immediately, choosing instead to remain still, an island of quiet in the middle of a bustling bar. The man smirked, his arrogance inflating as he took a few steps closer. He leaned against a nearby chair, speaking loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, though his intention was clear. He wanted to intimidate. "Think you're tough, old man," he sneered. "This isn't your kind of place." The words were sharp, laced with mockery and contempt. Laughter bubbled from his lips, but it wasn't the natural sound of humor. It was the forced laughter of someone who believed that fear could be manufactured with arrogance and loud voices. Steven Seagal didn't flinch. He raised his glass, took a deliberate sip of water, and looked up slowly. His eyes met the intruder's, calm, unshaken, almost dismissive. There was no spark of fear. No flash of aggression. Just quiet, focused awareness, the kind that made someone stop mid-sentence and second-guess their own audacity. The bar seemed to pause. A few regulars glanced over, sensing tension but unsure what was happening. The jukebox in the corner continued its soft tune, but it felt distant, like background noise in a suddenly heightened scene. Even the bartender, wiping a glass absent-mindedly, stopped for a fraction of a second, noticing the subtle intensity of Steven's gaze. The intruder mistook Steven's silence for weakness. He straightened his posture, puffed out his chest, and tried to appear larger than he was. "Yeah, I said it," he snapped, leaning closer. "Maybe you should just leave before something happens. Don't think you can just sit here and act like a big shot." A few patrons in the bar exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted in their seats. Phones peeked out from pockets. The tension was like a string pulled tight, ready to snap at any moment. The intruder laughed, loud this time, trying to draw attention, hoping to shame the quiet man at the corner table. But Steven didn't move. He didn't respond verbally. He simply placed his glass down, eyes never leaving the man who thought he could intimidate him. Every second that passed, the intruder's confidence seemed to falter, though he didn't realize it yet. Before we continue, comment below. Would you stay calm or stand up in his place? Because what happened next would make every person in that bar rethink arrogance, confidence, and respect. What seemed like a harmless challenge would become a moment no one could forget. The stage was set. The bully thought he was in control. The quiet man knew exactly what he was doing. And the sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated the calm before the storm, the moment where confidence would meet consequence. The bar was still buzzing quietly in the background, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses masking the tension building in one corner. The intruder, feeling emboldened by the silence, took a deliberate step closer to Steven Seagal. He wanted to assert dominance, to make the quiet man feel small. He leaned forward, trying to appear bigger than he really was. He shoved a finger sharply into Steven's chest, not too hard, but enough to signal aggression. The movement was calculated, meant to intimidate and draw attention. His eyes were full of arrogance and smirked as he sneered, "Time for you to leave before you get hurt." A few patrons turned their heads, curious about the confrontation. Some whispered, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Here was a man who thought he owned the bar, ready to challenge anyone who dared sit quietly. The intruder's confidence filled the space around him like smoke, and he didn't notice the subtle shift in energy around the corner table. Steven didn't flinch. Not a muscle in his body twitched. He simply looked up at the man, faint smile playing on his lips. His eyes, calm yet piercing, scanned the intruder with the precision of a predator assessing its prey. Every patron in the vicinity noticed the contrast. A man fueled by arrogance confronting a man who exuded controlled power. The intruder misread the calm as weakness. He took a step closer, looming over Steven, his tone growing sharper, more threatening. "I said leave. You don't belong here," he barked, trying to make his voice echo across the room. Steven's lips curled ever so slightly into a smile. His hand rested lightly on the table, near the glass of water. No one could have guessed the speed and precision coiled in that quiet stance. Seconds stretched, the tension like a tightrope over a deep chasm. Then, the intruder made his move. He reached for Steven with both hands, intending to grab and push him out. He lunged forward, confident that the quiet man would finally react. But Steven was no ordinary man. In an instant, movement that seemed impossibly fast unfolded. Steven shifted his body like liquid, almost preternaturally, avoiding the grab effortlessly. His right hand shot out with exact precision, twisting the intruder's wrist in a way that left the man off balance. A sharp, subtle crack echoed, not loud, but unmistakable. The intruder stumbled backward, his smirk replaced by shock. His body betrayed him as he tried to regain balance, but the pressure of Steven's controlled force had already taken effect. Bones, ligaments, and tendons responded to the calculated motion, leaving him flailing, struggling to stand tall. Patrons gasped and murmured, some instinctively pulling their phones from pockets to capture the scene. The bartender froze mid-motion, wiping a glass with a rag, eyes wide. No one had expected the quiet man to strike with such precision, to neutralize the aggressor without raising his voice or shouting a single command. Steven remained calm, almost statuesque, his expression unreadable but commanding. Every movement had been measured, intentional, perfectly controlled. There was no rage, no showmanship, no need to dominate for the sake of ego. His power spoke for itself. The intruder's confidence evaporated in seconds, replaced by pain and confusion. He tried to lunge again, but his body refused. Steven's movements were a lesson, precise, silent, and devastating without drama. He had underestimated the quiet man, assuming arrogance could intimidate someone who didn't need to prove anything. By the time the intruder hit the floor, clutching his arm and wincing in shock, the bar had gone almost silent. Conversation stopped mid-word, eyes glued to the corner table where Steven Seagal had proven a simple truth. Underestimating someone calm and controlled can have immediate consequences. What had begun as a boastful act of intimidation had been dismantled in seconds. Every patron now understood that this wasn't a man to provoke lightly. The quiet, composed figure at the corner table had transformed the atmosphere in an instant, turning arrogance into humility, aggression into caution, and chaos into a lesson no one would forget. The moment the intruder hit the floor, the energy in the Lucky Horseshoe Bar changed instantly. 1 second, the room was filled with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional laugh from a regular. The next, the air felt thick, heavy, almost tangible with shock. Every patron froze mid-motion. Drinks paused halfway to lips, chairs stopped scraping the floor, and even the jukebox seemed to falter as though it sensed the sudden tension. The man sprawled on the floor, clutching his arm, his face pale and eyes wide with disbelief. The confidence he had walked in with, the swagger, the sneer, all gone. He looked around, as if seeking an explanation from anyone, but the room offered none. The only figure unmoved was Steven Seagal, standing at his corner table, calm, composed, unshaken. Whispers rippled through the bar like a wave. "Did you see that?" One patron murmured to the person next to them. Another whispered, "I thought he was just some old guy. That was insane." Phones appeared in hands, screens raised to record, capturing the stunned reactions of the crowd as much as the incident itself. The faint glow of notifications flickered across faces, but no one dared move closer. Even the bartender froze mid-wipe, the rag paused in his hand. He had seen his fair share of bar fights, but nothing like this. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't brute force. This was precise, almost surgical control. He swallowed hard, unsure whether to approach, call for help, or just step back. There was a lesson in the air, heavy and silent, and everyone could feel it. Some patrons shifted nervously in their seats, looking at each other for reassurance. A few muttered prayers under their breath. The bar, once a casual afternoon haven, now felt like a stage where a single, silent authority had taken command. The intruder's pain was evident, but so was his humiliation. The room wasn't laughing, and there was no mockery, only awe. Steven Seagal finally stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture dramatically. He just rose with the same calm he had displayed the entire confrontation. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and filled with quiet authority. His eyes swept the room briefly, acknowledging the stunned patrons but saying nothing. The silence in response was louder than any words could have been. The intruder struggled to rise, groaning, but no one offered a hand. Some watched, still in disbelief. His bravado had evaporated, replaced with fear and confusion. For the first time, he realized that the man he had tried to intimidate was not just calm. He was deadly, precise, and in control. Even the bar's regulars, who had been sitting quietly, sensing tension but avoiding involvement, now whispered amongst themselves. Some recorded videos, capturing the shock etched on everyone's face. Some simply stared, frozen in a mixture of fear and admiration. Each glance at Steven confirmed the same truth. This was not a man to provoke. No one spoke. No one moved. The intruder clutched his arm, still in shock, unable to comprehend how swiftly the situation had turned. Steven remained still for a few more seconds, then returned to his seat as if nothing had happened, his glass of water untouched, his calm demeanor unbroken. The room exhaled collectively, quietly acknowledging the authority that had just entered and dominated the space without a single raised voice. Respect, not fear, had been earned. The lesson was clear. Arrogance can crumble in the presence of quiet, controlled power. The atmosphere in the bar had shifted permanently. People who had walked in thinking this was a casual afternoon now left with a story, a warning, and a memory they would never forget. Steven Seagal's presence had transformed the ordinary into something unforgettable, and the silence that followed was proof enough that actions speak louder than words. The bar had fallen into an almost surreal silence. The intruder lay on the floor, clutching his arm, his earlier bravado completely gone. Patrons whispered nervously among themselves, eyes darting back and forth, trying to process what had just happened. Some shook their heads, some laughed nervously, and some simply stared, frozen in awe. Then a couple of regulars, familiar with old movies and martial arts legends, squinted at the man sitting calmly at the corner table. One leaned toward his friend, whispering so softly it was almost inaudible, "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" The words seemed to ripple through the room. A few heads turned, some faces lighting up with recognition. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "That's him. The action star. I can't believe it." Others froze, as if the knowledge added another layer to what they had just witnessed. The intruder's eyes widened further, if possible. Panic overtook any remaining pride. He attempted to speak, his voice shaky, words tumbling out faster than he could control. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean. I didn't know. Please." His stammering only made the situation worse. Steven didn't react aggressively. He didn't mock him. He simply nodded once, a subtle motion, almost silent, almost casual. But in that small gesture lay authority, calm judgment, and a quiet message that actions had already spoken louder than anything he could say. "Sometimes," Steven said softly, his voice carrying across the tense room just enough to be heard, "lessons come before words." Every patron felt the weight of that statement. There was no anger in it. No desire for vengeance. Just truth. The intruder's expression shifted from disbelief to understanding, though shame and pain still tinged his features. He had misjudged the quiet man, misjudged the room, and misjudged himself. Some of the regulars whispered to each other, exchanging astonished glances. One of them, a woman sipping her afternoon coffee, shook her head in amazement. "I can't believe I just watched that," she murmured. "That was unreal." The intruder struggled to rise, his pride battered as much as his arm. He looked around for support, for sympathy, for anything that might salvage what little dignity he had left. But the room no longer belonged to him. The power had shifted, unmistakably, to the quiet, composed man who had sat peacefully through the confrontation. Steven returned to his water, his calm demeanor unshaken. Every movement was measured, deliberate, and composed. He didn't need to shout, to argue, or to prove himself. The lesson had already been delivered. Respect had been earned without theatrics, without threats, without chaos beyond what was necessary. Patrons who had been recording with their phones lowered them, some in awe, some in disbelief. The realization hit them all at once. They had witnessed something rare. A display of controlled power, humility, and authority all wrapped into one moment that would stay with them forever. And then came the engagement moment. Steven's eyes swept the room ever so briefly, landing on those who had watched the drama unfold. "What would you do if someone disrespected you like that?" The narration seemed to echo in the minds of everyone present. "Fight back or walk away." The bar, silent moments ago, seemed to pause even further, as if waiting for the answer. Each person reflected, weighing their own choices, imagining themselves in a similar situation. Would they rise to the occasion with calm precision, or would arrogance cloud their judgment? In that moment, the intruder, humbled and shocked, realized that it wasn't just about pain or punishment. It was about awareness, about respect, and about understanding that every action has consequences. The reveal was complete. The quiet man at the corner table was no ordinary patron. He was Steven Seagal, a legend, a master, a living lesson in calm strength. And the lesson he had delivered that sunny afternoon would echo far longer than anyone could have imagined. The tension that had gripped the lucky horseshoe bar, for what felt like an eternity, began to slowly dissipate. Steven Seagal, having delivered his silent but undeniable lesson, stood from his corner table. His movements were smooth, deliberate, and calm, as if nothing unusual had just occurred. He adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, gave a faint nod to a few patrons who dared to look at him, and started walking toward the exit. The intruder, still sprawled on the floor, was frozen in shock. Pain radiated through his arm, but it wasn't just physical discomfort that weighed him down. Pride, arrogance, and the smug confidence he had carried into the bar had all crumbled in the space of a few precise seconds. He tried to lift himself onto the floor, rubbing his arm, but the humiliation ran deeper than the muscle ache. Every eye in the bar was on him, some in awe, some in sympathy, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the turn of events. The bartender finally exhaled audibly, the rag in his hand now hanging loosely. He had witnessed countless scuffles, fights, and drunken spats over the years, but nothing had ever unfolded like this. There had been no yelling, no chaos, no blaring sirens, just controlled, silent authority. He glanced at the rest of the staff, all of them standing behind the counter, equally amazed. Their expressions mirrored each other, relief, disbelief, and admiration all mixed into one. Patrons began murmuring again, the low hum of conversation returning to the bar, but it was different now. The air carried a new weight, a subtle respect for the quiet man who had transformed an ordinary afternoon into a lesson in humility and power. Conversations were cautious, respectful. People shared glances, nodding silently at one another as if collectively acknowledging the lesson they had just witnessed. Steven reached the door, hand on the handle. Before stepping outside, he paused for a moment, surveying the bar one last time. His eyes met those of the intruder, still sitting on the floor, stunned into silence. Steven didn't say a word. No lecture. No scolding. No threat. Just a calm, deliberate look that spoke louder than any sentence ever could. The message was clear: arrogance meets consequences. With that, Steven pushed the door open and stepped into the sunlight. The quiet warmth of the afternoon enveloped him as he walked away from the bar. His departure was as calm and understated as his presence had been throughout the entire encounter. He didn't seek attention. He didn't revel in the fear or respect he had commanded. The lesson had been delivered. That was enough. Inside the bar, the intruder remained on the floor for several seconds longer, absorbing what had just happened. He realized that his assumptions, his mockery, and his sense of superiority had been entirely misplaced. Pain and shame mingled in a way that would leave a lasting impression. The lesson wasn't just about physical defeat, it was about the cost of arrogance, the value of respect, and the quiet strength of those who carry it. Slowly, he began to sit up, rubbing his arm and shaking his head. He avoided eye contact with anyone, knowing that words would not undo the truth that had been shown to him. Outside, sunlight glinted off Steven's back as he disappeared from view, leaving the bar as it had been, yet fundamentally changed. The bartender finally spoke, voice still quiet but filled with awe. Did we just witness that?" His words hung in the air as the staff nodded silently, all aware they had been part of something extraordinary. Respect had been shown without a single shout. No words could have conveyed the same clarity. The lesson was simple, yet profound. Arrogance has its consequences, and humility carries its own quiet power. Patrons gradually returned to their drinks, conversations, and normal routines, but their minds lingered on what they had seen. A quiet man, a calm presence, a precise strike, and a lesson that would remain with them far longer than the day itself. The Lucky Horseshoe Bar would never feel ordinary again. The sunlight streamed through the Lucky Horseshoe Bar windows, casting long afternoon shadows across the wooden floor. The room had returned to its usual rhythm, the soft hum of conversation, clinking glasses, and casual laughter filling the air once more. But something fundamental had shifted. Patrons who had walked in expecting a normal, quiet afternoon had instead witnessed a lesson that would linger far longer than the fleeting minutes of excitement. Intimidation, they realized, only works when someone ignores the calm strength standing quietly in front of them. The intruder, who had walked in full of confidence and bravado, had misjudged the room, the man, and himself. His arrogance had led him to believe that volume, posture, and aggression were enough to dominate another person. But Steven Seagal had proven that true strength requires no theatrics. It does not shout, it does not boast, it does not need validation. True power acts, deliberate and precise, leaving no question as to who is in control. Every patron in the bar had felt the contrast that afternoon. The intruder's loud, forced confidence had seemed powerful at first, drawing attention and eliciting whispers. But it was hollow, temporary, and fragile. Steven's quiet presence, in contrast, carried weight beyond appearance. He had not raised his voice. He had not threatened or humiliated. Yet, in moments, he had changed the dynamics of the entire room. Respect had been earned in silence, through skill, precision, and calm awareness. The bartender wiped the counter slowly, still shaking his head in disbelief. The staff exchanged quiet glances, some smiling nervously, others simply breathing a sigh of relief. Even the regulars, who had initially watched from a distance, whispered to each other about what they had just seen. This was more than a confrontation. It was a lesson in humility, control, and the consequences of underestimating someone. And it wasn't just about physical skill. The moral of the story was clear. Respect is not earned by intimidation or loudness, nor is it deserved because someone appears weak or quiet. Respect must be given freely, even in the absence of threat, even when no one is watching. The intruder had failed because he ignored this fundamental truth. Steven had succeeded because he embodied it. The bar patrons, now settling back into their drinks, carried with them a new awareness. They reflected quietly on their own interactions, the ways they had misjudged people in their lives. How often had they assumed weakness where strength existed? How often had they dismissed quiet individuals, thinking they were powerless, only to be proven wrong later? The lesson was universal, extending far beyond the walls of the bar. As Steven Seagal walked into the sunlight outside, leaving the bar behind, the message was clear. True strength does not need recognition. True respect is earned quietly, through actions, integrity, and awareness. The memory of the confrontation, the precise movements, the calm authority, and the lesson delivered without a word would stay with everyone who had been present. Now it's your turn. Type respect in the comments if you believe calm strength is real power. Reflect on the story you just witnessed. Would you stay calm like Steven in the face of provocation, or would you react like the bully? Think about the choices you make in your life. Strength is not always loud. Power is not always visible. And humility, above all, is the trait that defines true character. Every action has consequences, every arrogance can meet its match, and every silent strength deserves recognition. The bar had returned to normal, but the lesson would remain, echoing in the minds of all who watched, reminding them that calm, measured action can change outcomes in ways shouting never could. Respect is not demanded. It is observed. It is earned. And it is remembered.